if Tim Walz and the selection of Tim Walz was meant to shore up some sort of comfort level with blue-collar America, it is a complete and total utter failure. It is not going anywhere. The scandals swirling around Tim Walz continue to grow, most of them, of course, about his misrepresentation of his service record, which is baffling to me. You served 24 years in the National Guard and you retire as a master sergeant. That's something to be proud of. And he should have been proud of it, but he wasn't, apparently, because he continued to misrepresent himself as a command sergeant major when he wasn't, at least not when he retired. And also, it's noble to say that you were part of the National Guard for 24 years domestically. You served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom by providing security at a base in Italy, nowhere near combat, of course, but a very important job. And that when it came time to run for Congress, he decided that he would rather retire rather than go into combat. And yes, the timing was probably questionable, but, listen, he made a decision and decided that his service would continue in politics. That's all he had to do. And the only challenge you could put in any of that was that he left his men to go fight overseas, and instead he went to Congress. And he could have said, listen, I get it, and I understand that criticism, but I decided that I would be more effective fighting in Congress to make sure that my men were safe, making sure that there was oversight over the Bush administration and how they were waging the war. He could have done this. But instead of what I just told you he could have done, and still maintained his dignity and his honor. Instead, he has lied. He has lied continually about being a command sergeant major. He has lied about where he served, because instead of saying he served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Italy, providing security to American bases, instead he says he served in Operation Enduring Freedom, which suggests to anybody's ear that he was in Afghanistan. And anytime somebody introduced him as a command sergeant major or introduced him as someone who served in combat, he never corrected them. Have you ever been with somebody in the military and you accidentally, overstate their record? I do it all the time when I introduce people, when I'm interviewing them for my radio show in Washington. If I introduce them wrong, if I say something that they haven't actually done, they are always quick to correct me and say, hey, just so you know. Like, for instance, the guy, Hung Cao, who's running for Senate in Virginia. He retired from the Navy, Naval Academy graduate, captain in the Navy. He was a explosive ordnance detail guy. He basically went and diffused bombs. I mean, this is a really, really risky job, a dangerous job, EOD. And he did it. He was assigned to, oftentimes, he was assigned to special forces squads, right? SEALs, oftentimes. So one time when I introduced him, I erroneously said that he served with the SEALs, and he interrupted me in the middle and said, Larry, I just got to make sure people know I'm not a SEAL. I was not a SEAL. I was EOD, but I was not a SEAL. This is what these guys do. Every single time this guy is introduced as a command sergeant major, he never, ever corrected them. Ever. I've never seen the video. I'd love for somebody to show it to me. See, he could have said, I retired after 24 years as a master sergeant. I served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And at a time when I was supposed to be deployed to go serve in Afghanistan, I instead chose to run for Congress. Instead, he's lied about it across the board. He's lied about his rank. He's lied about how he served overseas. And he's lied about leaving his squad member. He says, oh, well, we were never officially told. That's a lie. They were officially told. And everybody has said so. All right, so yesterday he came out swinging. He's not going down lightly. Of course not. He's a bully. He's an angry, stereotypical, what liberals think an angry white Midwesterner is. He actually fulfills that stereotype. And now he's going on the offensive and going after anyone who dares to question his record.
Then in 2005, I felt the call of duty again, this time of being service to my country in the halls of Congress. My students inspired me to run for that office, and I was proud to make it to Washington. I was a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and a champion of our men and women in uniform.
I love it when politicians do this when they're reading their teleprompter. That was written in there in brackets was pause for applause. Now, Joe Biden used to read that out loud, of course. But look at how he does it. I just want to play this again because this is also a tell about this guy. I'll point it out in a second. Let's watch it together.
I was a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and a champion of our men and women in uniform.
You see, that pause that he just did was begging for applause. That wasn't a natural pause. And let me tell you something else. I've met a lot of members of Congress and members of staffs of Congress who are champions of men and women in uniform. They all have one thing in common. Whenever you meet them, they will never tell you, I am a champion of men and women in uniform. They will always humbly say that it's the least they can do for the men and women who are serving us overseas, that they're going to fight like hell to make sure that the men and women in uniform are provided the bare essentials, make sure that they're equipped, that they're protected, that they're paid, that they're fed. That's what they think their responsibility is when they're in Congress. But they will never, ever, ever, ever refer to themselves as champions of men and women in uniform. They'll let somebody else do it maybe, and then they'll humbly say, oh, shucks, well, I do what I can. But who the hell calls themselves a champion of our men and women in uniform? What is with this guy?
Veterans Affairs Committee and a champion of our men and women in uniform.
Pause.
Pause. I'm going to say it again as clearly as I can. I am damn proud of my service to this country. And I firmly believe you should never denigrate another person's service record. To anyone brave enough to put on that uniform for our great country, including my opponent, I just have a few simple words. Thank you for your service and sacrifice. But look,
this was celebrated by the left and by the media as Tim Walz defending himself and then taking the high road. And that should be the final word on this. Oh, really? I do love this, the new Democrat rule here, that anybody who wears the uniform and is brave enough to wear a uniform deserves honor and respect, and you shouldn't question their service. Because, see, I'm actually old enough to remember when George W. Bush, who served in the Texas Air National Guard, was questioned constantly about his service. We were told that he took the coward's way out because he didn't serve overseas. Air National Guard, what, he just flew airplanes around because he was a congressman's son and the CIA director's son, right? Remember that? Remember questioning whether he even showed up, the whole Dan Rather scandal where they lied about his service as the Air National Guard? Democrats didn't seem to have any problem with that. In fact, I'm also old enough to remember when Dan Quayle was vice president under George W. Bush's dad, and they questioned his service at the time and why he didn't go to Vietnam. In fact, I think the only Republican nominee in my lifetime who has worn the uniform that they didn't question was Bob Dole. Because Bob Dole actually lost part of his arm in the Battle of the Bulge, I believe it was, in World War II. He was a bona fide American hero. They even questioned John McCain, if you remember right. They questioned whether he, had some sort of mental psychotic episodes from his times at the Hanoi Hilton. And whether he was, responsible for his plane going down. Remember that? Oh, yeah, the Democrats love questioning Republicans who wear the uniform. But now, this guy, apparently, you can't question, and now he's going to grandstand and say, anybody who wears a uniform deserves our respect. Well, you know what? I'm going to let other people who wear the uniform speak out about this. We'll start with J.D. Vance, who says, hi, Tim, thank you for your service, but you shouldn't have lied about it. See, that's what this is about. He says, I'm damn proud. I'm damn proud of my service. If you're that damn proud, then why did you damn lie about it? You shouldn't have said you went to war when you didn't, nor should you have said that you didn't know your unit was going to Iraq. Happy to discuss more in a debate. It's very good from JD. From my colleague at Town Hall, Kurt Schlichter, he said, I firmly believe that soldiers should deploy with their unit and that soldiers shouldn't lie about their record. We'll rapid fire through these. Colonel Rob Manis said, let me say this one more time. No one is denigrating his actual service record. They're denigrating the lies he tells about his service record. Walz is dishonoring himself by embellishing his military service record for political gain. How about Gunny Sergeant Jesse Jane Duff. Tim Walz wants us to give him a big thank you for his service instead of pointing out how he fabricated his service record. This Marine Corps veteran says kick rocks, stolen valor. And Sean Parnell, former Green Beret, no one is denigrating his actual service, but Walz did denigrate it himself by lying. He could have said he was a retired E8, would have been fine. He didn't. He also abandoned his troops just prior to them going into combat, and while they fought, bled, and died, he acted like he was there, all in order to help him win a campaign. Those are fellow veterans who are saying that to Mr. Walz. No, this is not going away just because you said to a paid audience at a union gathering that you're damn proud and no one should denigrate anybody. Bull. No. You're not allowed to rewrite the rules now. George W. Bush and his Air National Guard service would like to have a word with you, Mr. Walz. And for those of you who think that we're overstating the case, we keep finding video after video after video of this man as a congressman or as a governor lying about his service. Here's the latest one. At a committee hearing of the House Veterans Affairs Committee.
And both of you, with your keen understanding of how this works, especially from National Guard families, I can tell you this, having been one of those that came back, we were in support of OEF, but being sitting in there with OIF veterans.
All right, so now that right there, he did say in support of OEF. In support of OEF, which is the proper phrasing. But then he completely spins it into as if he were with those who were serving in OEF. Listen.
When we came back, they showed us the horse whisperer and told us to be nice when we went home. And that was the extent of it. That was in 2004. Now, I'm proud to say that because of the people sitting in here and people who came before me, things have changed over the last 4 years. They have not changed enough. But Mr. Kennedy is following and moving something forward that the late senator from Minnesota, Senator Wellstone, advocated so clearly: mental health parity, and this issue of destigmatizing mental health, of understanding. And I, being in there and knowing as a first sergeant, know exactly what you're saying, and watching as people aren't trained on this, that there is there's a discrimination that goes against a soldier who has the courage, the fortitude, and, as you said, the insight to admit this. So there's a couple things I want to ask you. And
all right. So let's just be clear here. They're talking about mental health issues and PTSD, which is a very serious issue. And he said, when we came back, they showed us the horse whisperer and set us on our way. Is he suggesting that he had PTSD after serving for, was it 1 year, providing security at a base in Italy? That he got PTSD from that? Is that what he suggested? That's what it sounded like, wasn't it? But here's an even more egregious one. This is as governor of Minnesota. This was the 9/11 Day of Remembrance 2021. Now listen to him tell this story about being in the National Guard. And then he immediately talks about being on a tarmac in Bagram as they're loading a flag-draped coffin onto a plane. Listen to what he says, and you get the impression of what he's trying to communicate, and then I'll tell you what the truth is.
The years that happened after that classroom, I had the privilege of serving in this state's National Guard, and when I left, I had a 2-year-old. When I came home, I had a 3-year-old. But as I listened to Jill and I listened to Mariah, the guilt, I came home, and my daughter went on. And when you're 2 and 3, she knew no difference. That's not true for some. They can't do that. And over the preceding years of watching us, and as our nation changed, and as our political systems became more difficult for all of us to understand, I stood one night in the dark of night on the tarmac at Bagram and watched a military ramp ceremony. And if you've seen it, which these folks, many have, unfortunately, you don't leave the same.
All right. Now you hear that story about how he was in the National Guard. And when he left, he came home and his 2-year-old was now a 3-year-old. Right? And he felt guilt when he came back because he made it back and others didn't. And it makes it sound like he was out on the battlefield and he left some of his comrades, you know, with a bullet in their body because they didn't make it back alive because they were right there in the desert, bloody sand. He was in Italy. right? And then he immediately fast forward to standing on a ramp ceremony in Bagram in Afghanistan. And it is true. He was on the tarmac watching a ramp ceremony in Bagram while he was there as a congressman on a junket with other congressmen inspecting healthcare options for the military when they were serving in Afghanistan. He was there to investigate healthcare situation. And while he was there, he was on the tarmac in Bagram. But you hear the story. You hear the way he tells the story. You know, there's a way to factually tell something so that people are not misled. And there's a way to tell a story in just a way so that people are misled. And if this was a one-off, it would be one thing. But do you notice whenever he tells a story about his time in the National Guard during the War on Terror, he never actually definitively tells it the way it's supposed to be told. It's always very vague, so that if you want to get the impression that he was serving in combat, carrying a weapon of war when he was in war, you will get that impression. This guy is psychotic. This is an absolute sociopath. One of our favorite X accounts, Western Lensman, is great at finding video, compiling it, and making great video presentations. This is not an official ad, but it should be. Take a look at this because this gives you a really good compilation of where we are with Tim Walz right now.
Tim Walz wants to be a heartbeat away from Commander-in-Chief, but Tim Walz has lied about his military record for years.
He's used the rank that he never achieved in order to advance his political career.
Walz lied repeatedly about his rank.
Retired Command Sergeant Major. Retired Command Sergeant Major. Command Sergeant Major. Retired Command Sergeant Major.
Walz lied about being in combat.
Can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war,
Walz dodged deployment by retiring when he knew his National Guard unit was going to Iraq.
Everybody knew they were going to train and go to Iraq. The warning order basically stated it, and too much later after he knew it, that's when he retired.
Walz disparaged Minnesota National Guard soldiers.
Mayor said, I request the National Guard. We're going to have massively trained troops. No, you're going to have 19-year-olds who are cooks.
That same Minnesota National Guard that he disparaged, unlike Walz, served heroically in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tim Walz is not fit to be anywhere near the office of Commander-in-Chief. Tim Walz is guilty of stolen valor.
He abandoned us. I mean, what the hell kind of leader does that?
Yeah, Western Lensman, great job. Nice work. Listen, here's the bottom line here on the whole Tim Walz thing. It continues to grow, and there will be more every single day. This thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't think it's going to affect Tim Walz being on the ticket. They're locked in with him. They're stuck with him. All right. Here's what it means, though. Here's what it means. The more this is pointed out, the politicians, specifically Trump and Vance, need to pivot this back to Kamala Harris and her judgment. This is her idea. All right. She had one job so far, and that is to pick her running mate. She single-handedly chose this person. It was all up to her. When the chips are down, this is the kind of decision she'll make. This is the kind of wisdom she shows, picking someone like Tim Walz, and the kind of diligent work that they'll do to vet people and to put together their team, because clearly this was haphazardly done. It's a complete mess. It's a nightmare. All right. So this is about Kamala Harris. This is about her wisdom, her competency, and her judgment, number one. And number two, remember the rollout of Tim Walz was about one thing, and that was to make Kamala Harris more palatable to all of those white, rural, blue-collar, suburban guys, right? Maybe even some of the women, because, oh, he's like America's dad. America's dad is a liar. America's dad is responsible for stolen valor. America's dad let other people go to war instead of him. If Tim Walz and the selection of Tim Walz was meant to shore up some sort of comfort level with blue-collar America, it is a complete and total utter failure. It is not going anywhere. This guy is actually a negative impact on the Harris campaign when it comes to appealing to those voters. I would argue that there may have been some fence sitters who weren't sure, who are now more inclined to vote for Trump than they would have been before Tim Walz was on the ticket. If you're talking about specifically those rural blue-collar union guys who he's supposed to be appealing to. So a complete and total disaster, and we couldn't be happier by any stretch of the imagination. Good job. Great job, Colin. Team Harris.